Welcome back to the channel. Today is going to be something new that I'm kind of going to be starting, wherein I'm going to try to go through early modern Reformed authors and go through certain passages of theirs that I think will be of interest to people. And these will probably be of a shorter format, um, but I'm sure that's what catches more people's attention. So for today, um, we're going to be going through something from Francis Turretin. I won't comment too much on his life if you don't know him already. He is known as one of our Reformed scholastics. He is Italian, if you can't already tell, Francis Turretini. And this is going to be on the question of the effectual calling. So, the official status of the question, as you often see in these kinds of texts. From Turretin here is the following. Is effectual calling so denominated from the event, from congruity, or from the supernatural operation of grace itself? And this is going to be in the fourth question in the 15th topic or locus of his Institutes of Elenctic Theology. So first, it should be mentioned that there is a common distinction that's made between two kinds of calling, one that is external and then one that's internal. The former of which is more general and universal, whereas the latter is particular to the elect. And this is dealt with in question one of the 15th locus. And in that same locus, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be dealing with the latter kind of calling, that is, the effectual calling. Now, Turretin provides us with three principal or chief opinions on effectual calling that are held among the papists. And in doing so, he's not really just making these up on his own. He's specifically drawing directly from the famous or infamous, rather, Jesuit Robert Bellarmine's work on grace and free will. And these three opinions are as follows. There are those who affirm that such a calling is effectual, one, from the events, two, from congruity, or three, from physical predetermination. The first position is attributed to Luis de Molina, Leonardus Blasius, Martinus Bucanus, and to most of the Jesuits. And the second is attributed to Bellarmine himself, Francisco Suarez, as two of its chief opponents, hence why Bellarmine and Suarez are often called congruists. And then the third opinion is attributed to the Dominicans or the Thomists. You'll see especially this notion of physical predetermination as attributed to Dominicans such as Domingo Banez or Diego Alvarez. Now, for the first position, this position states that effectual calling is said to consist in the assent and cooperation of man. So, in short, the calling is denominated as effectual because it actually brings about its effect. Both the elect and the non elect are called, and so the only reason that we refer to a specific kind of calling as effectual is really just because that general calling that was given to all men actually resulted in someone's conversion in this instance. As Bellarmine says, which Turretin quotes, this opinion makes it so that it's in man's power to render sufficient grace effectual. And Turretin argues that this position, just like Pelagius himself, transfers the principal cause of conversion to the free will of man. And he notes that Bellarmine rightly rejects this view and that it should be rejected on the basis of 1 Corinthians 4:7, which Bellarmine also uses when he argues against it. Because if this first opinion from a good amount of Jesuits was true, then one could answer Paul's question by positing themselves as that which makes them differ from the non believers. Next, you have um, that position that the effectual call is from congruity. With the second position, there's a kind of external moral suasion, by which proponents of this view would maintain that one can reject the calling while also affirming that it has an infallible effect. Turretin quotes Bellarmine as saying that the efficacy of this suasion is to be understood, quote, in such a way that the efficacy of grace proceeds not so much from the vehemence of the persuasion as from the disposition of the will, which God foresees. Indeed, when God thus sets forth something by internal persuasion, in such a way that he sees the will to be suitable to consenting. Put simply, Turretin sees these offers as affirming that this congruity consists primarily in three things. So, first, in suasion. Secondly, in such a contemporaneousness or suitable mixture of suasion in such a person so disposed and in such a place and time. And then thirdly, in scientia media or middle knowledge, by which he foreknows how the will is about to incline itself, placed in such a time and on such occasions. Turretin argues that this view fails and that it also falls into the same problem that the first one does, even though Bellarmine rejects that first view that was held by Bacchanis, Molina, and others, thus positing an inconsistency in Bellarmine. And he argues that for these congruists, not only the partial but the whole cause of the difference will be from man and not from God. Instead of being able to say that prevenient grace, congruity, the concourse of various circumstances, the foreknowledge of God, or that anything else is an efficacious cause, only the human will is affirmed as such for this view, according to Turretin at least. And he also takes issue with the notion that the conversion of man consists in a simple and bare moral suasion, wherein we would interpret the language of certain passages in sacred scripture, such as the sayings that God will take out our heart of stone and give us a heart of flesh, as nothing other or nothing else than to morally persuade to conversion. Quote, as when the orator, by an eloquent peroration, not only exhorts but also persuades. Now, there are other comments and arguments that Turretin makes against the position, but for now, I'll just mention one important qualification that he makes, which is that efficacious grace actually can be called congruous in a certain sense, inasmuch as God, by efficaciously moving the will, moves it congruously to consent. Nonetheless, Turretin makes the point that conceding that doesn't grant Bellarmine's position, nor that of any of the so called congruists, since the congruity that is being agreed on here is not derived from the disposition of the will itself or from any extrinsic circumstance. Lastly, for the third position, which is that of the Dominicans or the Thomists, as mentioned earlier, they have the efficacy of this calling consists in physical predetermination. Now, it should be noted that physical here doesn't mean what we typically mean by the term physical, colloquially speaking. In this context, that which is physical isn't referring to that which is like material. And to help understand this distinction, for instance, if we were to take Aristotle's four causes here, physical predetermination would be understood as an influx of efficient causality, whereas a moral cause or moral auxilia is better understood with regard to final causality. And it can take the form of God's vocation or invitation, or his presenting of some particular object to the will in order to attract its response. Turretin thinks that the position wherein the effectual call is denominated effectual from physical predetermination comes closest to the truth, but he's still a little hesitant to affirm that physical aspect of predetermination. Uh, Concerned that it at least seems to confound the natural acts of providence with the supernatural acts of grace. And as a result, he seems favorable to Francisco Zumel's comments on the terminology at one point. Zumel, who was a Mercedarian, that is of the Mercedarian order in the Catholic Church, as he says that before the time of these inventors of the term physical predetermination, we were speaking differently, saying that the efficacious actual grace of God, which pre-moves us, must be established, and that God properly moves us efficiently by the assistance of His grace. Wherefore, there is no reason why they should so often repeat that term, physical predetermination. Now, that's pretty much it for this video. And for the next one, I'll continue in this same question from the Institutes, commenting on Turretin's further elaboration on the opinion of the Orthodox, that is, the Reformed, expressed in 5 propositions.